It all started a few weeks ago. I was looking for ways to earn some extra money, so I decided to make some videos on TikTok. There was a problem, though. First, I am a near 40-year-old mother of 3 kids, and we know the algorithm doesn't favor unpretty people. Second, I wasn't thrilled about other moms and friends and family members possibly finding my account. I'd definitely get roasted for it during the holidays. So I made a persona. That is, I did several questionable things. I bought a long black wig. My usual hair is short and light brown. I wore completely different makeup, and I used a filter. And I called myself Catherine, dissimilar enough from my real name, Casey. The result was a beautiful woman who looked like she was in her early 30s and only vaguely resembled me. I started off by posting skits about working in retail, since that's what I'd done before having kids. Then I transitioned to unboxing-type videos that I also posted on YouTube Shorts. At first the videos sort of flubbed, but then I got a few to go viral. I wasn't some big household name or anything, but it was enough to make a few $100 extra a month. Things were looking up. Everything started spiraling the week after Thanksgiving. I noticed a comment on one of my videos. Haha, it read, "I'm from Ohio too." I froze. Did I say that in the video? I was always very careful to not let any personal details slip, despite the persona. I rewatched the video. I watched as Catherine pulled a Labubu out of a box. It took a while to get all the way here to Ohio. I said with a little chuckle. I froze. Oh shit, I actually did say that. I rewound and replayed that part. Again and again. I really didn't remember saying that. As I watched it, I noticed something else, too. The video almost seemed to glitch for the tiniest moment before I said it. My face froze and jumped, like the video was spliced. A terrible idea swirled in my head. TikTok isn't like adding AI clips to videos, is it? It sounded insane. But I remember one of my friends telling me a few weeks ago about her Facebook ad she was running. There were so many AI features that added extra stuff to her images and descriptions. It was like a full-time job turning every single AI setting off. Was TikTok doing the same thing? I must have just let it slip, I thought. Nothing else to it. But then it kept happening. On a video where I unboxed some lotion, a comment saying, "There's no way you're 42. I watched the video, and sure enough, Catherine / I stretched my lips into a broad, toothy smile and said, "It does wonders for my 42-year-old skin." I know I didn't say that. I mean, who even says 42-year-old skin? That was such a weird phrase. It almost felt like an AI had spit it out. Sure enough, when I rewatched the video, there was that odd glitch again. My face froze for a split second, then jerked upwards before I delivered the line. Even if it's AI, how would it know I live in Ohio? How would it know I'm 42? The internet knows everything about you. A little voice in the back of my head whispered, "Oh yeah, it knows you like dark chocolate caramel and cold brew coffee. It knows your circulation shit, because it keeps giving you ads for socks and slippers. It knows you're a night owl and you like bird watching." And I slammed my phone on the desk. Next time I made a video, I would look at every option with a fine-tooth comb, making sure I did not in any way enable an AI thing. Of course, the video I posted the next day had the same thing, and it was worse, so much worse than the other two. "It's got my initials, see?" I said, as I pulled out a keychain with my initials on it, KSB. As the filter shifted ever so slightly on my face, she smiled and said, "K for Casey." I said Casey. No. I was sure I'd said Catherine, because I remember almost saying Casey, and then catching myself saying Catherine. There's no way. I quit. Stopped uploading videos. Stopped opening the app. My earnings quickly dropped without new content, but I didn't care. This was creepy. I knew I said Catherine. There's no way I said Casey. Was there? The next morning, I woke up to a notification on my phone. Not from TikTok or YouTube. From our Ring camera. Someone had been in our front yard at 3:24 a.m. I pulled up the video, confused. Probably just a bug or animal or something. But as I watched, all the blood drained out of my face. Just beyond our porch stairs stood a figure. Their outline was blurry and pixelated, since they were halfway in the dark. and they were standing facing away from the porch, but they looked like they had long, dark, slightly wavy hair, just like my wig. The woman stood there for 2 full seconds before slowly walking back into the darkness. "Who is that?" my husband asked, not seeming to make the connection. "I don't know. Who would be out that late?" "I think Karen gets up at like 4, doesn't she?" he said, referring to the older woman across the street who'd been a competitive swimmer in a different lifetime. "Yeah, but her hair isn't that long." I swallowed. "Doesn't it sort of look like, well, the wig I wear when I do the videos?" He glanced over at me. "A lot of women have hair like that." I swallowed. "Do you think we should tell the police?" "She isn't really doing anything. Maybe let's talk to the neighbors and see if anyone else caught her." I would have called the police, but we lived in a townhouse development. There were about 30 houses within 100 feet of us, counting the ones across the street. The woman was standing technically in our front yard, but that's only about 10 feet from the sidewalk. It could be any one of our neighbors or anyone visiting them, not someone particularly targeting us. Their hair did match the wig, but my husband didn't think it was an issue, so I decided it wasn't either. I kept an eye on the Ring camera for the next few days, but nothing happened. No weird visits, no strange women skulking around outside. So I wrote it off as a one-off thing. On a whim, I checked my TikTok page to check the stats on my videos and see if I was accumulating any residual views for this month's income. As the page loaded, my blood turned to ice. There was a new video, a video I didn't upload. The thumbnail was different than the other videos. It was dark, and she appeared to be outside. My stomach plummeted. Hands shaking, I opened the video. She was standing in the dark, in front of a row of townhouses, in front of my house. Her filter-smoothed face was barely visible in the low light. The right half of it was completely black, completely in shadow. Her dark hair swayed loosely in the wind. She looked down at the camera, her one lit eye glittering in the street lamp. She smiled, and then the video ended. It looped like that several times before I reacted and closed out of the app. I stared at the phone, shaking in my hands. Shit. Someone was stalking me. Someone was using the same filters and wig to look like my persona. But they knew where I lived, and they knew it was me, and they fucking hacked my account. I called the police. I told them everything. I showed them the videos, every single one. Part of me expected the video of her or me in the dark to be gone by the time the police came, but it was still there. I hadn't imagined it. The police searched the neighborhood, made a report, promised to talk to neighbors, told me to keep my doors locked, to call them at the first sign of trouble. But without the woman right there to track down, wasn't easy. It would take days to find out who hacked my account, even if they could get TikTok to comply. So I packed us up and we drove to my mom's. We'd stay there for the next few days, until we had an update. I knew that whole TikTok thing was a bad idea. My husband said after the kids had gone to bed. "I know. I'm sorry. This is bad. Really bad." He hung his face in his hands. "Did you delete the account at least?" "Not yet." Do it. Do it now. But the police might need it to see who. Delete it." I logged in and deleted the account. Thankfully, there were no new videos. Just that same one of her standing outside the street lamp. I finally got in bed around 2 a.m., but I still couldn't sleep. I was tossing and turning, wondering when we could go back home, what this woman's deal was. I finally gave up on sleep and walked out into the kitchen to get a snack. As I walked towards the refrigerator, something caught my eye outside. No, there was a figure standing at the tree-line behind my mom's house. Pale skin, long dark hair, standing absolutely still, like a mannequin, just barely visible in the shadows. I flicked off the lights and reached for my phone, but I'd left it upstairs. I looked down, patting my pockets. Motion caught my eye. I froze. She was standing only 10 feet from the door now, and she looked exactly like my persona, down to the filters, but in real life. Eyes that were slightly too big, skin that was poreless and smooth, pouty perfect lips, but she still carried an uncanny resemblance to me. My pointed chin, my heart-shaped face, my tall stature and long legs. I finally ran up the stairs, got my phone, and called the police. And again, they didn't find anything, despite combing every inch of the property. It's been 2 weeks, and I haven't seen her since. My husband assumes the crazy stalker lost interest. But I know better, because when I looked at myself in the mirror last night, I saw several strands of jet black hair growing from my scalp. And I wonder if she's waiting to replace me, when no one will know the difference. 5 months ago, I moved out of my parents' house after graduating from university. The offer I got for my current job came late, and because of that I had little to no time to find somewhere to live. Everything was extremely out of my budget, and my starting salary couldn't accommodate anything but a small hole in the wall, exactly what I ended up getting. I never thought living alone would be so lonely. Like most people, I had a handful of eccentric roommates to get me through my studies, but a studio apartment can only accommodate so many things, 2 beds not being one of them. So every night when I came home from work, I would be greeted with the eerie stillness of a dark room and cold sheets. I would cook up a depressing meal consisting of whatever ingredients I had left. Most of the time it was spaghetti. On my 5th day of working, I suppose news had spread through the small apartment complex that everyone had a new neighbor. Just as I closed my door and flipped on the light switch, a knock startled me out of my wits and caused me to drop my backpack on the floor, the contents spilling everywhere. I had turned around and seen through the peephole the one friendly face of a smiling older lady. Her hand was poised to rap again on the door when I opened it cautiously and greeted her. "Hello," she had said quickly, though her eyes were closed, and she held a white cane with a tennis ball on the end in her withered hands. "My name is Barbara. I live next door." "Harper," I replied with a nervous chuckle. "You don't know how bad that scared me. I wasn't expecting a knock. Are you having a hard time adjusting?" she inquired. You could say. Suddenly, she reached a hand to my face and touched my cheeks. "My, you're so thin. I bet you don't even have time to cook your own meals." The next night I received a cooked meal, and from then on, another almost every evening. If I came home late, it would be left on the doormat with a small, endearing sticker. Usually, the top would be wrapped in tin foil, which I would have to peel back to uncover what was within. Today it happened to be an oven-baked pizza. I smiled to myself heartily. I felt a little less alone that night while I turned on my laptop and got to enjoy a bit more time relaxing than I usually did. However, that night I woke up to an odd scratching on my wall. My bed was pushed right beside Barbara's apartment, and so I could sometimes faintly hear her TV or some kind of music that she listened to. That was the first time I heard some kind of meowing too. Not just one mew, but a couple at once. Then an even fainter hushing, and they all went quiet. I thought nothing of it, being so late and having to wake up so early, so I ignored it. Many times, when I left my house the following Monday, I heard something akin to a wet slapping in Barbara's apartment. Pushing apart the worst thoughts, I rationalized that she was maybe pounding pork or making some kind of pastry as older women do. I thought for the longest time that she lived alone, but sometime in the following week, I glimpsed into her apartment on the way into mine. I made eye contact with a small face in the corner of her house, which stared deeply. Barbara was on her way out and shut the door quickly, holding a large bag of garbage. "Do you live alone, Barbara?" I asked as I put the key into my lock. Barbara smiled and sighed while motioning to the trash she was hauling. "No," she said while she brought her cane before her, sweeping it across the floor. "I have my son who visits quite often, but he's quite the useless lump when he does visit." I laughed and pushed my way into the studio. I let out a deep breath and tried to shake the image of those eyes out of my mind, but I couldn't. They were so empty and devoid of humanity. I made a note never to ask about Barbara's situation again. It was none of my business anyway. That night I opened my door to a light rat-tat-tat at my door, which I knew would be Barbara. We talked briefly as she handed me another meal. However, she mentioned that her son had helped her bake this one. "That's nice," I had said. "I would bake if I had the time." "He loves to bake. How about I get him to make you his signature focaccia? It's made with sardines. I just don't know why." but it adds such a savory taste that garlic and olives alone just won't give you. Focaccia. I paused. I thought focaccia was pretty advanced. Not at all, she chuckled. Not for him. He's quite skilled with his little hands. We bid goodbye for the night, and I closed the door. I revealed another dish, this time a lasagna with large chunks of meat, which looked to have been improperly ground. I cut myself a slice and assumed position in front of my laptop again. A few bites in, I felt something stringy in my mouth. It was getting caught on my tongue and between my teeth and gagged, dropping the plate onto my tiny table with a clang. I coughed viciously and stuck 3 fingers into my mouth and grabbed the string that had been causing me to choke. Surely it was a string from whatever meat product she had made. I had thought a blind woman would have a hard time noticing something like that. I could no longer think when I pulled out a thick black clump of hair which looked as though it had been pulled off of a hairbrush and placed within the lasagna. I vomited right then and there and felt shaken the rest of the night while I cleaned my mess and threw out the food as quickly as I could. I saw many more pieces of hair within. For hours I could not shake the feeling of the hair and kept poking around in my mouth with my fingers as a phantom string kept appearing in my mouth. I fell asleep to the sounds of mewing once more, a cacophony of cats in the room next to me. Barbara did not appear to me for the next few days. I spotted a bag of cat food and some cans in front of her door one morning, which vanished when I came home in the evening. A couple more deliveries occurred before the woman appeared to me once more. This time, she was hauling a very oversized cat crate, which appeared to have a large cat within it. Despite my apprehension, I couldn't bear to watch such an old lady haul such heavy cargo, and I volunteered to help her at once. "You are very sweet," she said as I grabbed the crate from her. "If you could just get it past the stoop, I'd be so grateful." So I hauled it over her tiny stoop and into her apartment. I was staring down as I took care to not bump the crate, and when I finally looked into her apartment, I hardly kept my jaw from falling onto the floor. The first thing that hit me was the stench, a grotesque mix of kitty litter and the odor of fecal matter and urine. 6 different cat boxes lined together and a massive overcrowding of cat trees. "Just put him there." Barbara motioned to a corner where identical empty crates rested. The room remained in darkness as I put it down. The cat within brushed my leg with what I presumed was its paw, but when I looked down, I saw a very hairy finger caressing my ankle. I jumped away. My eyes widened to saucers when I finally met eyes with the thing in the cage, those eyes from before boring into mine. "Mew," said the thing, a clearly human thing. It was completely nude and hairy from its cheeks to the tip of its finger, its nail being the only truly bare thing. It appeared to have extremely wet lips and a damp, pink nose to pair. Its abnormally long tongue rolled out of its mouth to reveal artificial spikes pierced into it as it licked the wire of the cage, the spikes getting stuck occasionally on the holes. The breath which radiated out of its mouth smelled like sewage and revealed teeth rotting from the tip to the root and covered with plaque. I looked back to Barbara, who obviously stared blankly at us. She had a ghostly smile on her lips. "Rusty is quite old and so sweet," Barbara said a bit sadly as she placed a couple muffins that she had resting on her counter. "That was Rusty I heard in the crate, wasn't it?" I rushed to the door and flipped on the light switch. It flickered weakly to reveal many more cat things resting in the shadows. They were huge, and I immediately knew they were all humans on some sick joke. They were all naked, I was certain, but covered in hair either glued or grown themselves. They all had tails which moved in sync left and right, and a quiet hum, which I had not noticed before became apparent. They all stared at me with circular eyes that tried their best to mimic a feline's. Some of them quietly mewed when I roved my eyes over the ones I would dare to look at. "Do you like cats?" Barbara asked. "I'm more of a dog person myself," I swallowed. "That's a shame. I'm a cat lady. When my husband passed away, I found I needed something to occupy myself with, especially when the first cat turned up at my door. I found they all came one by one. Now I think I have about 9 or so by the sounds of it. They eat so darn much, I can barely keep up with their appetites." A weird silence befell us as I nodded, and she obviously expected a response. I could only stare as one of the cats walked on all fours to the nearest bowl and ate the kibble, within then made to slurp up an open can of wet food beside it. It quenched itself with water from an automatic dispenser, revealing identical spikes to the cat in the crate. "I'm sure you're tired," Barbara resumed. "Take these muffins. Thank you for helping me, darling." "No problem," I managed as I took the muffins and retreated into the safety of my own apartment, only now noticing how many different voices really mewed from the apartment next door. I heard Barbara hushing them sweetly long after I left. My mother didn't believe me when I reached out the next day for advice. She was convinced I didn't know what breed the cats really were, that I was ungrateful for everything the woman was doing for me, being judgmental as everyone in my generation usually was. "You always take people at face value, and you don't care to learn anything about them," she had hollered. "Have you ever considered the stress is really just getting to you?" Upon her suggestion, I thought maybe everything I had seen had been because of the low light and the stress I had been experiencing from working such long hours without nourishing my body. Maybe I'd hallucinated. The light in her apartment was so faint anyways, I couldn't be sure of anything. However, I was sure I didn't want to receive any more food from Barbara. After a night of certain scratching on the walls next to me, I decided I'd write her a note, give her some change, and leave it at that, so I never felt obligated to repay her. "Thank you for your kindness with helping me settle in." I remember the note I read. "I hope this is enough to cover the expenses of ingredients, and a bit more to help with your cats." I took a deep breath as I left my apartment very late that night to ensure she was asleep, and I wouldn't be confronted. I slid the note and a small envelope under the door of Barbara's apartment, and turned until the sound of vigorous scratching on the door caught my attention. Then a very loud yowling from the other side. "Shoo! Shoo!" I tried to hush it as quickly as I could to not awake Barbara, but it just would not stop. Out of curiosity and desperation, I turned the knob of the door to let the cat out. What turned to face me was a grown man, just as tall as I, with none of the cat-like features of the other things within the apartment. He acted like one of the things as he went on all fours and skittered out of the apartment and into the hallway. He was naked as well, and I averted my eyes as he flashed me all the way down towards the entrance. I slammed the door shut and rushed back into my room. Now I'm back on my laptop. I have work in 2 hours, and I really should be leaving, but I don't think I want to after I've just released something into my apartment complex. I've rationalized everything up to this point, but I just can't understand a colony of cat people being housed by a seemingly unaware, blind old woman. The hair, their nudeness, munching on the cat food she provided with what I knew to be a meager pension, since she lived in a place like this. He was just a guy. A regular guy. You probably wouldn't have noticed him if you passed him on the street. When I looked at him, though, I could see he was an angel, a sweet fruit that God made just for me. He had the kind of warmth that could make everyone feel comforted and safe just by walking into the room. Getting hypnotized by those soft, blue eyes was like floating in a warm pool filled with cuddly otters while you're being served cake and ice cream on your birthday. Every single person felt like the center of his attention when he was around, and it seemed so effortless for him to be adored. That's why I deserve what happened to me after I killed him. I really just couldn't help myself. His kind has always been my favorite. All that selfless energy going unappreciated by the world can leave a person desperate for someone to notice, longing to be held, begging for a moment calm. That blood practically pours itself down your throat when you bite down, and then radiates the feeling of deep comfort and warmth through every artery and synapse in your body for days as you digest all that goodness and love that everyone else took for granted. He didn't see it coming. They never do. He should have been thankful, really. I gave him way more time with me than I'd given any of the others. He kept me entertained. He was funny and cute, and I really just lost track of time. What's a year or 3 when you can't even count the centuries anymore? He was just fun to be around and so full of that delicious warmth that I could feel it pulsing from him just by being near him, and his velvet touch made my skin respond with intoxicating electricity. Looking back, I don't know why I didn't just let this be good enough. If I had it in me to live like this with him, Why did I have to take more? I wasn't even hungry. I was happy. I think he was happy too. It didn't have to end this way. It was our anniversary, and we'd gone to the restaurant he'd taken me to on our first date. Watching the sunset reflected in his eyes filled my soul up so full it felt like I was overflowing, and I just couldn't bear the thought of anyone else seeing those beautiful eyes, or the warmth of his presence being wasted on someone else. Just his laugh could lift a whole party, and suddenly I felt nauseated by the very idea that anyone else gets to feel this feeling he gives me too. None of them could ever appreciate his essence the way I do. It was like instinct took over, and another beast came out to hunt. I saw the way the bartender tucked her hair behind her ear and smiled at him when he ordered our drinks. She sobbed and cried and desperately tried to trick me when I caught her by the back door on her break. I'm just doing my job. Guys give you better tips if you flirt. Bitch couldn't fool me. I could still feel the way his warmth lingered on her mind. I'd spent so much time focused on him that I must have forgotten what good blood even tasted like, because I couldn't even stop myself as I gorged on her menthol-flavored throat. Or maybe I was just desperate to taste a pathetic little crumb of his warmth on her. But she just made me feel empty instead. All that golden energy I was just overflowing with was gone, and I was covered in blood and standing alone in the alley behind an expensive restaurant, holding the limp body of what used to be a bartender. I didn't even feel the pop when her neck snapped. I hadn't been that rough with my food since I was a child. How embarrassing. I pulled up a manhole cover and tossed her into the storm drain with a wet thud. Someone else's problem now. I couldn't let him see me like this, so I texted him that I was feeling sick and took a cab home. The driver asked if my costume party was fun, and I just quietly nodded. I'm glad not everyone can smell blood, because my last kill was still making me nauseated, and I wasn't in the mood. I just wanted to get comfortable at home. I peeled off my sticky dress and threw it into the fireplace, and then stepped into the shower. I stood hypnotized as I watched the bright red streaks of what used to be the bartender spiral down the shower drain. It felt peculiar, like a piece of me was missing. I turned up the water temperature, but I still felt cold. It felt like I was still homesick, even though I was here in my own goddamn hot shower. Since when does it feel so gross to feed? I forced myself to vomit up the bartender out of fear she had some sort of blood cancer. I honestly don't even think that could hurt me, but I just needed to try something. Why did she make me feel so empty? She wasn't even worth all this anguish. Even after I rinsed everything down the drain, I still felt empty. I crawled into bed and pulled the blanket over my head and just sobbed. I didn't know if it was actually happening or if I was just mimicking something I'd seen humans do until I couldn't get it to stop no matter how hard I tried. Writhing and retching, I balled myself up and bawled my eyes out for what felt like a century before I finally heard the lock on the front door click open and the warmth came flooding back into my home. His hands were still cold from the winter air, but his gentle touch felt like a lifeboat in a storm. I pulled him onto me, still damp from the tears in the shower, and wrapped him up in my arms tighter than he probably realized I was capable of. He looked up at me with those empathetic eyes and squeaked out, "Did something happen?" As I squeezed the air out of his little lungs, I eased off a little and pushed his head down onto my chest. "No," I said sweetly as I stroked him. "I just felt sick, but then I missed you once I was gone. I felt bad for leaving you there. I'm sorry you felt so awful. I know we were both looking forward to tonight." He gently kissed my collarbone, and I kissed his forehead and smelled his hair. "Why don't we make another reservation for next weekend when you're feeling better?" I nodded with my lips still pressed against his head and sighed deeply as I felt the tension in my body dissolve. "Do you smell something?" he asked. My eyes shot open. Terror. That cold, sick feeling, like wet pennies and menthol. I don't remember what happened next. I just remember feeling alone and homesick in my bed, desperately holding open the eyelids of a limp body to get one more glimpse of the eyes that used to fill me up with happiness. He must have seen the shock on my expression as I realized what I'd done, because his bloody face twisted into a sympathetic gaze looking up at me as he let out one last wet, bloody sigh and whispered, "See you soon." He had no idea what he was saying. Couldn't have. No way he knew how special he was. Generations of being prey had quietly turned the tables in a way neither of us could have ever expected. This wasn't the way it was supposed to go. Everything was wrong. I drank this man's golden essence. I was supposed to feel radiant right now. Overflowing, goddammit. I couldn't remember the moment I swallowed him for some reason, but I could still taste how pure he was on my lips, and I just felt empty. It was still right here. Every piece of him was still in this room, but he was gone, and all the color had been drained from the world with him. At some point I got up and carried him to the bathtub. I'd never felt unsettled by the squishy feeling a corpse is like this, but I couldn't just leave him that way. I washed the blood off him and wrapped him up in the blanketa in bed. I wanted him to look peaceful, but I couldn't make his damn face do the thing it used to do when he laid his head down on my chest and slept. He just looked like a doll now. A husk I dressed up in his clothes and put in his bed. I cried again for the second time in my endless life as I watched our home burn. Countless men I've swallowed this way, and I'd never stuck around for this part before. Never felt the need to say goodbye. I stood there in the cold and watched the humans deal with it until our home was just a steaming pile of memories and blood. I didn't try to feed again for a long time. Just the thought made me feel sick until the hunger became excruciating that I could think of nothing but the desperate need to consume someone else's warmth. It's Valentine's Day, and I'm watching a couple get engaged on the beach from the bluffs above. My stomach's growling, and I can picture the happiness in her eyes and how he put it there. But when I get down there, the scene isn't at all what I imagined. She's pregnant, and he reeks of the sweat of another woman. This kind of happiness is fleeting. It's a lie he tells her to feed off her warmth. Maybe I can get a taste of that warmth if I put her out of her misery. I could comfort her as she drifts softly into me. She won't ever have to know how much mercy I'd be giving her. I took a step toward them, and suddenly, like a veil lifting, I felt his embrace from behind, and I froze. The couple, lost in their own bubble, paid me no attention as I watched their moment like a statue caught mid-stride. Years had passed since I felt this hug, but I knew it was his, warm and comforting. Nowhere but everywhere all at once. Arms of air, arms of nothing, arms of warmth and joy. I could feel them wrapped around me, firm and strong like I remember, but at the same time, I knew I was completely unbound. I could step forward. I could feed on this couple. I could feel their fleeting warmth. But I have to leave these arms. I stood there in the cold February air, lost in time like a memory that never happened. He held me for hours, and no one paid any attention. The couple left. Others walked by. The sun set, the sun rose. I don't know how long, but when it was over, I didn't feel hungry anymore. Cold again, but not hungry. There was color back in the world again after that. Not everywhere, not like before, but I could see flickers of it once in a while. I followed the color to a park a few days later and just sat, watching the kids sort of sparkle as they played. It's hard to describe what my eyes were seeing, but it just looked warm, and for the first time in my life, I just wanted that warmth to stay where it was so I could admire it for a while it lasted. A birthday, a picnic, a game of tag, core memories being formed in real time in front of me, little fireflies of color in a sea of sepia. Then a little sparkle drifted down from somewhere and rested in my palm. It tingled with warmth, and I closed my hands around it and let it radiate into me. Without words it told me, and I understood that I needed to stand up, and then it pulled me around the corner by the baseball dugout, and that's when I locked eyes with someone. A man, short and hairy, in all the wrong ways like a toe with an ingrown nail. He was holding a speck of warmth of his own so tightly in his fist that his knuckles were white. What I saw in his eyes was less than nothing. A void that could never be filled, demanding warmth, but never giving. He still had the unhinged grin of a man who thought his plan had gone off perfectly right up until I broke his wrist. The little girl asked if he was okay, and I smiled warmly and told her I just needed to give my uncle a shot because he's not supposed to be away from the hospital, and sent her back to her mom. I dragged the towman back to his ugly white van, threw him in the back, and then tore the engine apart with my bare hands. Maybe I should have killed him, but I knew it wouldn't make me warm. I just left him stranded and wounded and covered in his own shit. That night I felt him cuddle me. It was faint, but I knew it was him. A dream of a feeling of a cuddle, but for the first time I slept like I did in his arms back then. When I woke up, I couldn't feel him anymore, but there was no mistaking him. It took time, but we figured it out together. His body died, but he's still there, wedged inside me, showing me the light. We speak through feelings and nudges, warmth and color. I can't hear his voice, but I know it's really him, aware, alive and guiding me. I honor his memory now by being the person he saw in me, the person he was looking at when I was focused on the sunset reflected in his eyes. Thousands of years of evolution finally taught a human how to kill vampires. I just wish she didn't have to die to do it. Yeah, Brazil. You know samba football beaches? Well, if you've been there, you probably know it's absolutely beautiful. I should know I am Brazilian, born and bred. Obviously we get some bad press. Violence in the bigger cities, poverty, drugs. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it's massively blown out of proportion by your odd gringo who thinks it's an anthropological experience to hike up the favela in Rio and risk getting their brand new phone stolen. What most people don't realize, though, is that Brazil is a huge country, bigger than the contiguous USA, and yet all people think about when they hear Brazil is what I said before, samba, football, beaches. Every once in a while you get that one smart aleck chiming in to say something about either bikinis or Brazilian butt lifts. Yeah, we have those too. But in between the beaches and the butt lifts, Brazil has a lot to offer. You've likely heard all about the Amazon rainforest, the biggest and most biodiverse tropical rainforest in the world. But have you heard about the Cerrado? I didn't think so. It's the most biodiverse tropical savanna in the world, and yet not many people even know about its existence. Then again, so many people still think our capital is either Rio or Sao Paulo. Well, our story takes place around the actual capital, Brasilia, in the middle of the Cerrado. When I was younger, my dad worked for one of the UN agencies in the city, a foreigner. He married my mom in his third year in the country and decided to stay. He bought a plot of land a little ways outside the city and built a fairly large house on a hill overlooking a small creek. The house was amazing, if only a little out of place, built among the shrubbery and twisted trees common to the Cerrado. It was the only house for a good distance, and my dad decided to build it in a style reminiscent of his home country. The result was that it stuck out like a sore thumb. Imagine walking around a Brazilian savanna, miles away from any civilization, and you find what looks to be a miniaturized Dutch canal house. But then, my dad's always been a bit eccentric. Where most upper-middle-class Brazilians would insist on hiring help to tend the garden or clean the house, my dad insisted on doing it all himself. Knew he'd say in the thick Dutch accent he always denied having. A man should know how to do these things himself. I was always too scared about being in the garden. Something just always felt off to me there. No life for miles, and yet it always felt a little too loud for me. Cicadas, birds, and the odd howler monkey screams made it too scary for a fragile kid like me. So I'd avoid it as best I could. I never really got what my dad liked about it anyway. He'd always come back inside dirty, clothes ripped where plant thorns caught the threads, and just stinking of sweat all over. But without fail, whenever he did come inside, he'd still prod me to come along. Said there was something magical about working in the garden, and again, a man should know how to do these things himself. One could only take so much prodding so. At some point I relented. I went with him into the garden. To no one's surprise at all, I hated every minute of it. He'd ask me to help, and in that all-too-familiar dad way would scream at me that I was doing it wrong. The heat was sweltering, and the air was abuzz with the sounds of the savannah ringing in my ears. I wanted to stop as soon as we started, but my dad would always pull me back into his gardening shenanigans. Now I'm sure a lot of you are thinking we were just cutting grass or tending to some flower beds. That's partially true, but in Cerrado we have a few extra concerns. Primarily, what we had been out there to do revolved around trimming our home security system, a tight-knit fence of briars whose thorns were as big as a baby's fingers. I was never sure what they were there for. I used to joke that if any thief made their way to our house, he probably deserved to take whatever was inside. But as it turns out, the briars were never meant to keep people outside. My dad said his biggest concern were the animals outside the fence. I get that. Between stray dogs and jaguars, there was a lot to be scared of. I just didn't realize how much. As we worked on the briars, I tried to keep my head down at whatever I was doing. We'd spend hours on the same branches, seemingly with no progress at all. Every once in a while I'd hear my dad comment on something, the quality of my work, whatever I was doing wrong, and the odd joke about something completely unrelated to the task at hand. At some point he stopped talking. I guessed he got to a particularly complicated network of branches, because all I could hear were his grunts as he pulled on his handsaw, up and down, to and fro. Soon enough I could only hear the sounds of the serrato echoing through the air. I must have been completely engulfed by the work, because when I finally did look up, my dad was nowhere to be seen. Neither was the house, for that matter. I'd seemingly walked further into the wilderness, though I had barely any recollection of having done so. But in looking up, I was caught by a wave of confusion. How had I come this far without knowing? And how was I going to get home now? The briars I had been working on were still standing behind me, blocking out the waning sun. I could only guess, but it seemed at the time that nightfall drew near. I thought Dad would probably come looking for me soon, so I was in no rush to lose myself even further in the wilderness. I decided to stay put. I sat down where I was and tried to find ways to pass the time. I counted how many animals I could hear. Cicadas, 1, a barking dog, 2, a whistling marmoset, 3. I played this game for long enough for whatever little light there was when I first got to this place to be completely gone by the time I counted my 6th animal. All the better, I couldn't identify it anyway. It made this sort of whooshing sound, almost as if it were the wind. The only way I could even tell it wasn't the wind was by the fact it sounded too man-made. I even thought it was Dad playing a prank on me, if only for a second. But no, I was alone. It was dark. I was alone, and I was scared. And then it happened. At first it was a distant light, weaving through the trees like it was swimming. As it got closer, I could make out what it was: a large silver-colored deer. A stag, with antlers like the branches of the briars I had been sawing hours ago. It was beautiful. It shone as though it produced its own light. At first it didn't seem to notice me. It kept moving as though it was the only animal in the whole world. But when it finally caught sight of me, its movements became more unnatural. In an instant it went from a faraway sight to being right next to me. Its light went from a joyful bouncing in the distance to an oppressive, blinding flash right in front of me. But I couldn't stop staring. It was beautiful. It seemed to take stock of me. But just as it came, it went, disappeared, without a trace, and I was alone again. As I fell asleep, I dreamed the creature again, gliding between the trees as if I weren't really there. And when I woke up, I was back home. Dad was shaking my shoulder, saying I'd fallen off the rickety ladder while trimming the briars and knocked myself out. According to him, everything I'd seen was nothing more than a dream brought on by heat and a bump on the head. Cut to last summer. I was deep into my PhD research on indigenous cultures of the Amazon when I saw the light again. This time it stayed at a distance, drifting between the trees, but I recognized it instantly. The same deer-like figure from all those years before. It lingered for a moment, then vanished as quietly as it had appeared. The next morning, I asked one of my interviewees, an elderly Ma tribesman, if he had ever heard of such a thing. "Anhanga," he said, "the tormentor of the dead." And in that moment, I realized something I had pushed aside for years. I don't think I merely passed out on that ladder. I don't know if anyone will ever read this, but I need to tell it somewhere. I know the internet is full of fake stories, but I swear what I'm about to write is real, or at least real enough that I haven't been able to sleep for a week. I'm a teen who's been into urbex for a couple of years. Nothing extreme, old factories, abandoned schools, places like that. But a month ago, I found a strange reference on an old 2009 forum, a discussion about a kid's park that never opened to the public, called Super Happy Fun House, supposedly built near the original Teletubbies, set the real one abandoned. According to the comments, part of the fake grassy set was now underwater. At first it just seemed like another weird rumor. Then I found some blurry photos, trees, mud, a broken sign, and a clue. Somewhere in the Midwest. I shouldn't have looked for it. After 2 days of hiking through the area, I saw it. A wooden sign, tilted, with a hand-drawn smiley face and the words, "Happy Fun Trail." I don't know why I followed it. Maybe curiosity, maybe stupidity. 20 minutes of walking through leaves and fallen branches, and then I saw it. A small wooden building, decayed, with a nearly faded sign. Super Happy Fun House. The door was open, not fully, just enough to feel like an invitation. The moment I stepped inside, I realized I wasn't alone. For figures stood in the middle of the room, like they'd been waiting for me. They were wearing Teletubbies costumes, but not real ones, just random suits, black boots, work gloves. The only authentic parts were the masks, which looked like they'd been ripped off giant plush dolls. They were worn out, dirty, the plastic dull and cracked. One of them, the purple one, motioned with its hand, and from the speakers, a distorted lullaby started playing. They brought me into a room full of old toys. They didn't speak, but they kept pointing at things I had to do, like stacking blocks or finding hidden objects. Every time I finished a task, the lights flickered like I was in some kind of kids' show, except I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside the walls was watching me. I kept telling myself it had to be some kind of weird art performance, until they took me to the basement. Down there was a tiny stage with a row of chairs. All four climbed onto the stage and started playing improvised instruments, making this slow, warped music like a sick version of a children's theme song. I wanted to leave. The door was gone. Not locked, gone, like it was part of the wall. When I turned back, the four figures weren't on the stage anymore. The basement wasn't a normal basement. It was a maze. Hallways, corners, rooms full of old toys, toppled chairs, boxes of half-finished costumes, and every now and then a light. Theirs. They moved slowly, their flashlights lighting up only half of the old plastic faces. They never ran, but it felt like they knew every step I was taking. I don't remember how I found the exit. All I remember is suddenly being outside in the woods, my clothes covered in dust and dirt. I ran without looking back. I know what you're thinking: dream, hallucination, made-up story. I would have thought the same, until I checked my phone. I had taken one photo of the sign when I first got there. Just one. I found it in the gallery. The sign was there, but on the right side, between the trees, you can see a red figure, perfectly still, wearing one of those ruined masks. It wasn't there when I took the picture. I'm sure of it. Since then, every night, I hear a sound at my window. A soft sound, like a balloon brushing against the glass. We hadn't seen Matt for weeks. At the company, everyone thought he had moved away, or that his sister's condition had gotten worse. Even our boss knew nothing, and nobody could reach him. I figured he would at least send a message. After 9 years of friendship, I didn't think he'd just vanish without a word. That's why I was so shocked when he walked into our usual bar on Friday night. He was genuinely happy to see me, and I was stunned. I'd thought maybe he wasn't even alive anymore. We talked for a long time that night. Matt looked a bit tired, but he was still cheerful, full of life, the same eccentric, funny guy as always. We stayed there until closing time. Since I didn't have any plans for the weekend, Matt invited me over to his place. I'd been there a few times before. His apartment had always been tidy, sometimes even the site of small parties. He used to invite a few co-workers too, the ones he actually liked. But when he opened the door this time, I was completely shocked by what I saw. A foul stench hit me right away. Piles of garbage bags stood in heaps. The kitchen looked like a war zone. Dirty dishes, leftover food, and rotting scraps were everywhere. Matt, I stopped in my tracks as he opened the door. Are you sure everything's okay? Of course. Why, Dan? Matt shot back instantly. I gestured around the entryway, pointing out that the whole place was a wreck. Just haven't had time to clean up, he said cheerfully with a wave. Come on, let's have a beer. Matt shoved some trash out of the way in the kitchen and tried to open the fridge, but a big garbage bag and a couple of boxes blocked the door. Oh, Dan, just give me a sec, he groaned as he wrestled with it. Go ahead, make yourself comfortable in the living room. I'll be right there. Reluctantly, I agreed to leave him in the filthy kitchen. Carefully, I squeezed down the narrow hallway, stepping around the reeking trash bags and boxes. By the time I reached the doorway to the living room, I heard a loud clatter from the kitchen, followed by some cursing and Matt shouting that everything was fine. A little tense, I stepped out of the garbage-strewn hall and into the living room and froze. It was like crossing an invisible line. The living room was spotless, neatly arranged, and even smelled fresh. The furniture gleamed as if it had just been cleaned. Maybe Matt hadn't been lying. Maybe he really was fine after all. Then my feet rooted to the floor. Someone was sitting in one of Matt's armchairs, a figure wrapped in a white robe. I couldn't see its face because it was bowed low, and the long robe covered it completely from head to toe. Only its hands were visible, long, yellowish nails, ragged and chewed down. It sat there like a king on a throne, its disgusting hands resting on the armrests. I just stood there, speechless. "What's wrong?" came Matt's voice from behind me. I turned, startled. "Who the hell is that?" I asked in disbelief. "Oh, don't look at me like that," Matt said cheerfully, handing me a bottle of beer. "That's just my roommate." "Your roommate? Since when do you have a roommate?" I asked, still frozen in the doorway. "Not long," he replied, pushing past me into the room. "Come on, Dan, sit down with us." An uncomfortable silence settled over the living room. Matt sprawled across the couch, sipping his beer, while the strange figure sat motionless in the armchair, almost triumphant in its stillness. I, on the other hand, was busy looking for a way out. No matter how hard Matt insisted that I sit down, I told him I'd been sitting enough at the office all week and preferred to stand. I started pacing the room. "So, how have you been, Dan?" Matt asked, taking a swig from his bottle. "Well," I answered nervously, my eyes fixed on an old photo on his shelf. "I'm fine, really. Everything's pretty much the same." The suffocating silence returned. The easy, cheerful tone we'd had back at the bar was gone. We sat there awkwardly, three strangers trapped in the same room. Matt," I finally gathered my courage. "I think I should get going. I've got something to do tomorrow." "At the bar you said you didn't have anything to do tomorrow," Matt shot back immediately. "Oh, right," I stammered. "Yeah, it just came to me." Matt took another drink, his eyes narrowing as he stared at me. I stuttered nervously. "I really should get going." He sighed heavily, set his beard down on the little coffee table, and looked straight at me, his face suddenly cold. "Dan, what's wrong?" he asked flatly. I glanced around, tense and uneasy. Every instinct in me screamed to bolt for the door and never look back. "Matt," I said at last, "it's just, this whole situation's a little weird. The mess out there and everything." Matt looked confused, as if he hadn't even noticed the state of his own apartment. The thought flashed through my mind. Maybe his so-called roommate didn't notice it either. "And," I said more quietly, "there's that guy." "I told you he's my roommate," Matt replied sharply. "When he wakes up, I'll introduce you." "He's sleeping?" I asked, glancing nervously at the hooded figure. "Whatever. Matt, I need to go. I'm sorry, but I can't do this." I turned toward the hallway, but I only managed a few steps. Matt was ready for it. He jumped up, grabbed something from beneath a couch cushion, and before I could react, he smashed a wrench across my face. Blood sprayed from my nose, splattering the wall. 2 teeth shattered. It happened in an instant. I was already on the floor. The world spun. Warm, metallic blood trickled down my face. "Dan," I heard Matt's muffled voice. "I'm sorry. Dan, this is the angel's request." I came to, disoriented and dazed. The harsh light bouncing off the white tiles stabbed at my eyes. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision and my mind. "Dan," Matt's voice echoed, distant and muffled, as if it came from far away. "Dan, I'm sorry, but I have to do this." I tried to lift my head, but I could barely move. Blood dripped from my mouth and nose in slow, heavy drops. That's when I realized my hands were tied. My vision gradually cleared. Matt was sitting on the edge of the bathtub in front of me. I was bound to the radiator. But the worst part wasn't him. It was the figure standing in the doorway. The white robe covered its entire body. The hood hung so low that its face was completely hidden. Only a wrinkled, dark red neck was visible, like it had been smeared with some kind of dye. The skin looked old, ancient, human and not human at the same time. Its feet were concealed under the robe, and its hands were tucked inside the sleeves. "Dan," Matt started again, "do you know the Christian Bible?" I looked at him. When I moved my head, I felt the wound in my nose reopen, and warm blood began to trickle again. I stared into his eyes, angry, terrified, and yet more furious than afraid. How can an old friend do this to me? "So you don't," Matt said when I didn't answer. "Then let me tell you a story. Abraham's story." I didn't look away from him. The hatred inside me burned like fire. How could I have been stupid enough to walk right into his trap? Matt glanced toward the figure in the doorway. It hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound. "I see," Matt said to it quietly, as if listening to an order only he could hear. "Then I'll do it your way." He stood up from the edge of the tub and stepped closer to me. "Dan, Abraham was willing to sacrifice his own son," he said coldly. "It was a test of faith. But tell me, did Abraham receive anything in return for his obedience?" I said nothing. I didn't understand what he was talking about, where this was going, or when he had turned into a religious maniac. "You don't know the answer either, do you?" Matt said softly. "But I was chosen. I've been given my reward." "What the hell are you talking about?" I growled, spitting a thick, bloody wad onto the floor. "Abigail's better," Matt said sternly. "She might even be released from the hospital soon." My eyes widened. Abigail, Matt's sister. She'd been fighting cancer for years. The last time we talked at the office, he told me her chances weren't good. Now, after a few weeks, she's suddenly recovering? The religious talk was strange enough, but this was insane. "Dan," Matt said again, pausing for effect. "It's because of the angel. I brought him offerings." "Matt," I shouted, realization cutting through the fog in my head. "You're insane." "Quiet," he barked. "I have proof. My sister's healing. All I had to do was offer simple sacrifices to God and his angel." "Simple," I roared back. "Killing a person is simple." "I haven't killed anyone," he said nervously. "Only food animals. That's different." "For God's sake, Matt," I screamed. "Then why the hell are you trying to kill me?" "I'm not trying to kill you," he said softly, glancing again at the white-hooded figure. "This is Abraham's story, Dan. You don't have to be afraid." Then he smiled at me, gentle, almost kind, as if I wasn't tied to a radiator, waiting to die. Matt and the strange figure had left me alone. He said he was going to prepare the altar. He'd completely lost his mind. There was no other explanation. And that white-robed thing, it wasn't his priest. Hell, I wasn't even sure it was human. I had to escape before I became the sacrificial lamb. I pulled at the pipe of the radiator, trying to tear loose the rope around my wrists, but it wouldn't budge. "Dan, what are you doing?" Matt's calm voice came from the doorway. He stood there, watching me struggle with the pipe. In his hand was the same wrench he'd used to knock me out. I let go of the pipe and raised my bound hands as much as I could, surrendering. Matt walked toward me slowly. His movements were calm, natural, like he was getting ready for a weekend cookout, not for a sacrifice. He untied the knot and pulled me to my feet. My hands were still bound, but at least I was free, and I didn't waste a chance. I shoved him hard. He fell backward into the tub, and I bolted for the door like a frightened rabbit. But just as I reached the living room and turned toward the hallway, the door slammed shut in front of me. It sounded like a gust of wind had blown it closed. I grabbed the handle and yanked at it, but it wouldn't move. The handle itself refused to turn. When I turned back, Matt was already climbing out of the bathtub, and the hooded figure had emerged from the living room. For a brief moment, I saw inside, and I knew instantly I'd rather die than go in there. The walls were painted red, probably with blood. Candles burned everywhere, and what looked like animal parts hung from the ceiling. But what mattered most was the sight of my bag on the couch. My phone was inside. I always kept it there. With one quick leap, I reached the bag and grabbed the phone. Matt was still staggering out of the bathroom, clutching his head. The white-robed figure did nothing. It simply stood in the doorway, the hem of its robe floating slightly, as if stirred by a breeze. When Matt started toward me, he suddenly froze. It was as if the hooded thing was speaking to him, but I couldn't hear a word. I dialed 911, barely managing to speak before I heard footsteps pounding toward me. It was Matt, charging at me with some kind of strange knife. I couldn't say much into the phone, but I hoped the shouting and struggle would be enough to send someone. Matt slashed at me, the blade sinking into my arm. I screamed in pain and kicked him as hard as I could between the legs. He stumbled back, groaning. He yanked the knife from my arm, and I ran, this time toward the kitchen. But Matt recovered quickly and came at me again. We crashed into the small cabinet by the window, then tumbled to the floor. He grabbed me and punched me hard in the face. I felt something crack in my nose, and blood sprayed across the floor. Then he started hitting me over and over, my head, my ribs, my chest, each blow landing heavier than the last. "Don't you get it, Dan?" he screamed. "God would have saved you at the last second." I could only gurgle blood. My face was a mess, every hit sending flashes of light through my skull. Matt got to his feet, wiping the sweat from his brow, looking around for the knife he'd dropped. "God damn it, Dan," he shouted. "When I walked into that damn bar and saw you, I knew it was his will. I knew you were there to help me. Why do you have to make this so fucking hard?" He found the knife, picked it up, and kicked me again hard. I was barely conscious. Blood poured from my face and my torn arm. He grabbed me by the legs and started dragging me back toward the living room, across the floor. Through my blurry vision, I saw my phone still glowing on the ground, the emergency line still open. "Help!" I gasped, as loudly as I could when I got close to it. "Help me! God!" Matt screamed. "God and his angels. They're the only ones who can help. Don't you see, Dan? The angel is here. He's here, living with me." He dragged me into the bedroom, thick with the stench of rot, and kicked me again before letting go. The white hooded figure was in the room, or maybe floating. I couldn't tell anymore. My mind was slipping, my vision gone, my only thought begging inside my head. "I don't want to die here." Matt raised the knife high above me. "And now, God will save you," he said, and brought it down. A searing pain tore through my side. I screamed a broken, gasping sound that barely left my throat, but loud enough for God maybe to hear, because a sound came next from outside. The door burst open. Matt roared, charging out of the room, the knife in his hand. Gunshots echoed. I stared at the sheep's head nailed to the wall. For some reason, my fading mind wondered where he'd even found it. There were no sheep in this city. I heard the cops entering, shouting, calling for an ambulance. One of them knelt beside me, pressing hard on my wound, trying to stop the bleeding. His voice was calm, but I could tell he was terrified. I could barely move my head, but I managed to nod weakly. He shouted something to his partner and ran out. That's when I saw it, the edge of a white robe drifting into view. Its hem was dirty, caked with mud, and behind it the legs. Even through the haze, they horrified me. They weren't human. They looked like the legs of a massive goat, black hooves clicking softly on the wooden floor. "We'll meet again," the white-hooded figure whispered, leaning close to my ear. The stench hit me, a choking mix of blood, decay, and something ancient. Somewhere deep in my fading mind, I knew this thing was the cause of everything. Until then, it said softly, "Take care of yourself, little lamb." And I blacked out. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. Everyone was shocked. No one had imagined Matt could lose his mind like that. The police said they hadn't found anyone else in the apartment, even after I told them everything. They claimed my mind must have broken under the trauma. But I remember the figure in the white robe, the stench that came from it, and its legs. And I know one thing for certain. It wasn't an angel.